Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Fair Life with Andrew McKee. I am, wait for it, Andrew McKee. So yes, it is Monday, October 2nd, and wow, just the year has flown by, hasn't it? Really crazy. But we do have a lot of fairs going on in the upcoming weekend. It is the crazy season, the really tons of fairs. This is kind of the peak. One of these days I'm going to have to graph it and just kind of figure out how many fairs per weekend throughout the year, because I know I'm actually curious what weekend would win as having the most fairs. I maybe there's more of a statistician in me than I thought. But yeah, that's I have to look into that because yeah, I know that this is kind of one of the crazy times. This definitely around now is that transition from some fairs are overlapping from September to October, some are just starting, and yeah, it'll be a very very crazy, interesting time to say the least. Oh, but yeah. I don't know. That's just interesting. Well, hello, hey Jan, and great to see you, and Sarit and Chris. Thanks for joining. Yeah, actually, yeah, may not be wow. Yeah, I know there are a few people that are on the road or out this week, so it might be a small group this week. Hmm, that's all okay, because it does happen. I do know that well, I came up with an interesting topic for this week because this article kind of just came across my surfing at one point, and it was, why do Americans not eat mutton? You know, I mean, why not? Kind of a weird question, right? I mean, why don't Americans eat mutton? So yeah, uh, any guesses? Anybody have an idea out there? Because mutton, I mean, around the rest of the world, mutton is a very common food. You, all yeah, all many places from Mongolia to Australia, mutton is pretty popular. From yeah, geez, it's from England to India, it is a huge thing. So yeah, why not mutton? You sometimes get lamb, um, but right. So so you think it's Jan's dad's fault that we don't eat mutton? Okay, I could buy that. That might work. Yes. Okay, and David never cooked it. Yeah, I mean, you sometimes will get lamb, um, but not mutton. Now, for those of you that don't know, I'm not making assumptions. The difference is lamb is a sheep that's, well, under a year old. That's pretty much the gist. And mutton is a sheep that's over 2 years old. So that's, yeah, that's kind of where that comes from. If you're curious what's in between, in America, that's called a yearling. And hogget, pretty much everywhere else in the world, is for that 1 year to 2 year range. But generally, you're going to get lamb or mutton. And of course, mutton being an older sheep, it has a more flavorful taste. So, yeah. Okay, Alicia is saying, okay, because we're boring. Okay, that's okay. Well, little judgmental, but okay, maybe. Um, and you're right. Yeah. Also, yeah. Not as much of goat here either. And you're right. Beef is king in Texas, David, and I live in Texas too, of course. So yeah, I mean that is kind of known, but other states kind of think the same thing. Um, it's less known. Well, now it is, but why? What brought that on? I mean, if you know, it didn't used to be in the rest of the world. That's definitely not the case. So, um, yeah. Oh, and hey, Kurt, great to see you. So yeah, we're talking about why mutton is not a thing in the U.S. Uh, Okay. Yeah, I mean, that is the general consensus in America. They think that it's a little too flavorful. Is a nice way to put it, maybe? Too flavorful? Yeah, we could say that. We could say that. Um, yeah, yeah, maybe. Well, now we're getting back to an old an old old John or old Western film, you know. But yeah, I mean, they did have some of that, sure. So yeah, okay. Well, if you're curious, I actually looked this up and did a little research. I know, shocking. For those that know me, you'd never think I would research, but I did. So yeah, it is interesting. Hello, April, or I should say hello. Since you just joined, we're talking about why mutton isn't a thing in the U.S. but everywhere else in the world. So yeah, I'll ask you a question. What year do you think had the most sheep in the U.S. historically? So if you had to pick a year that said this is when the U.S. had the most sheep at one given time, what year would that be? What do you think? Take a guess, if you have any guesses. So true, so true. Yeah, never happens, never. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. Yeah, when do you think we had the most sheep in the U.S.? Had to be some year at some point. I'll give you a little more time, but yeah, just it's a good question, I think, because you might think, I mean, when did lamb chops were popular at some point? When did that happen? When did it change? I mean, it's kind of a weird question. Um, yeah, no guesses. Nobody wants to take the risk. Okay, Kathy says 1800s. Interesting. Bold, because you'd think there'd be more now. Although, maybe there was more land back then, but depending. 1880s, Kevin. Wow, that's specific. Well, yeah, I'm going to get to that. Don't worry. 1965. Okay, that could be. I mean, sort of when lamb chops fell out of fashion. Maybe. 1776. Okay, yeah, because that's when the British left. So, so they took all the sheep with them. Is that the idea? Um, I know, right? Right. I try, Nancy. Um, yeah, and some people like it, some people don't, but it is certainly a lot more loved outside of the U.S. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you, Kevin actually was right. It was 1884 was the year. Katsurita came with the 1860s, close. But yeah, Kevin got it. 1880s was, yeah, right on. 1884. There were 51 million head of sheep in 1884. And after that, it just started going down, and it just kept going down and down and down and down. This year, if you're curious, there are 5 million head of sheep in the U.S. That's it. Just 5 million. Now, cattle in the U.S. this year, about 90 million head. So a bit more. So, yeah, I mean, sheep, yeah, I mean, mutton is just not really a thing. Most of the, sheep, the meat, it ends up going into more ethnic foods in the U.S. That's where or sold outside of the U.S. That tends to be where a lot of it goes. It's kind of interesting. Well, okay. There is a certain tradition of barbecued mutton that still holds in Western Kentucky. But try as I might, nobody knows why. It's just one of those things. Barbecued mutton is a thing in Western Kentucky. Who knew? But yeah, other than that, yeah, that's where it really all goes. So I kind of went back and started looking and trying to figure out where that went. Now, of course, Alicia's right. This kind of does remind me of that whole why we eat turkey legs at Ren Fair. You'd normally think that Henry VIII would be eating, mutton. And that's the obvious assumption. But when you see pictures of him these days, he's always holding a turkey leg. Why is that? Because historical accuracy? Not at all. And I did touch on that a little bit a couple of years ago in one of the shows. I researched a little bit, but I went back and researched it even more because, well, if you can't be obsessive about history, what can you be obsessive about? So I checked a little more on that, and all this research on mutton kind of inspired me more. So, yeah, okay. So here's the gist. Back in the 1800s, you have kind of to think about it as two camps. You had sheep and you had cattle, beef cattle. Those were kind of the two camps, and they were completely different industries. I mean, you'd think that there would be a lot of crossover, right? Not the case. Not really at all. Sheep were primarily kept for wool. Meat was just a bonus. But the emphasis, especially back in the 1800s, was wool plus you get some meat. Excellent. So it was all about the wool industry, which was very important and very big. So, that was kind of the thing. People didn't look at it as a meat product as much, although they did do a lot of canned mutton back in the day in the 1800s. If you're curious, the first instance of mass-produced canned mutton was 1831. So there's your Jeopardy question for the day. But, it was sort of two completely different approaches. But when you get to the butcher, it was kind of the same. I mean, a lot of it was more local types of things. Butchers had deals going with local farmers or ranchers, and they would supply them with the meat that they needed to sell to people in the cities or in the smaller towns or whatever. And that's kind of how that worked. It was very local or regional in how it was laid out. Well, there were some problems with that. And especially as technology started growing, the railroads started becoming a huge deal and a huge thing, so they could ship things all over the country. Refrigeration started becoming a thing in the late 1800s. So all of these opportunities about shipping food, whether it's meat or fruit or whatever, around the country started becoming possible. And they started looking at doing it. Now, where do they invest the money? Do they invest it in with sheep, or do they invest it with beef? And all the money that was coming in, they looked at it as a profit thing. And beef, one cattle is this much meat, one sheep is this much meat. And the wool industry was still good, but it just didn't seem to make as much sense. And the wool industry wasn't really interested in expanding that way. They liked their setup. They had their setup for collecting wool, and meat was just extra. So they weren't really looking for the change. Kind of weird, but a lot of money got thrown into beef, and beef was, well, it made it work. I mean, they made it work. They made it very economic. They changed everything so that they could ship beef all over the country really cheap. And there was a mentality at the time that, the pinnacle of eating was the porterhouse steak in the nice restaurant. Even in the 1800s, that was the view. So making it at an affordable rate that people could get changed everything, including their view of what they should be eating. So yeah, that's kind of where it all came from. So yeah. Oh wow, yeah. They wouldn't even try lamb. Yeah. Janine's talking about students who wouldn't even try lamb. Yeah, it's a really, America, they just look at it very strange, like a taboo food. And Jan was actually very right. I mean, later the perception gradually changed. Also, at the same time, a new invention in the late 1800s started taking hold, and that was synthetic fibers. Now, it didn't really start getting somewhere until the 1930s and started building into a thing, but by the 1950s and 60s, it really spelled the end of the wool industry, including the sheep industry in America. So that's when it really went away. But yeah, synthetic. It really. Yeah, I should probably bring up some pictures, shouldn't I? Let's see what I have here. Let me see. Let's see. Got what do I got? I'm all backwards on the pictures now. Okay, sheep. There we go. Sheep. So yeah. and yeah, we've got like the synthetic fibers. So yeah, always interesting. But yeah, that kind of hurt the sheep industry a lot. Now there still, of course, is one out there, but it's definitely not the same. And there's only so much land. There really is. So yeah, that's kind of the thing. Now, also, there was this view that mutton was only for the rich. And to put it in perspective, I mean, well, on the Titanic, they on the menu for the first class people, they would serve mutton for breakfast and lunch. I know, breakfast mutton, but oh well. That was one of those things that the rich thought was something that they could eat and what people associated with it. And later, okay, it was still mutton was pretty common overseas in Europe. And during World War II, they had a particular, let's see, I have a picture of that, a sea ration, which contained mutton and vegetables. And it was considered one of the worst. People hated it. American soldiers hated it. It was one of their least favorite. So yeah, I mean, Jan was talking about her father not liking it from military. I think that's what she was talking about. It was just not a fun thing. Not a fun thing. Woo. Yeah. You're right. Yeah. You're not wrong. But, you know, like a lot of things in America, polyester, it's all about price and cost. So. Wow. Yeah. Okay. There is that. Yes. But anyway, this is it was really a challenge to try to make mutton even a thing after World War II. 1 million soldiers came back to the U.S. and were kind of like, mutton, no. No, never again. It was just a taboo word. So lamb chops, yes. Mutton, no. That's kind of the gist and how mutton, yeah, it ceased to become a thing. I mean, it kind of stemmed from the fact that the poor in Europe, they didn't eat meat. Several hundred years ago, medieval times up to the 1600s, they didn't really eat much meat at all. So when you had all of these settlers coming from Europe to Australia to South America to the Northern America, they suddenly had all this land they could hunt on and get meat, and it was an amazing experience for them. So meat became very important. And if you look at the 4 countries that eat the most meat per capita, guess what they are? The US, Australia, New Zealand, and Argentina. So it definitely became a part of the culture. It definitely was a thing. But anyway, yeah, let's go ahead and talk about how the turkey leg came about. Because, well, okay, I've talked a little bit about this before, but let's start off with, okay, you think that Americans don't know history very well now? And believe me, if you've worked at a Ren Fair at all, you really believe they don't. And these are the people that are trying. Well, 100 years ago, it was worse. And they really didn't know much about European history. It wasn't so much if it wasn't about World War I, they really didn't know much. And the whole idea of, I mean, the only thing they knew about Henry VIII was maybe that he had a bunch of wives. And if they knew that, it just wasn't, British history was not much of a thing, or European history was not very relevant to people in America. That isolationist view, America-centric view, was a huge deal. So, yeah, they really didn't know much. And then this movie came out. And I think I showed the picture a little bit earlier. The Private Life of Henry VIII, 1933, with Charles Laughton. And it changed everything. It was a huge success. First British movie to be a big hit in the U.S. A lot of British actors started importing into the U.S. because of this film. Laughton, the actor here, won the Best Actor Oscar for that year. And huge deal. So, and this scene here is the most famous. It's the one where he's sitting in the big feast hall with a lot of his servants and people all around him. And he's railing about this and that, and how his advisors are trying to push him to do this and how stupid it is. And he's going through this full chicken in front of him. You can kind of see it on the plate and in his hands. And he's just throwing bones as he eats them behind him. It's a hilarious scene. It goes on for like 2 minutes, where nobody else says a word because they're afraid. And it's a famous scene. But that is where we get that view of the gluttonous Henry VIII. Because historically, this is not accurate at all. This was more like a black comedy kind of thing. It was. It didn't talk about really politics. It didn't talk about war. It didn't talk about religion. It just talked about Henry and his wives and how he went through them. And it was, yeah, it was a different kind of movie, and not that historically accurate, but interesting and fun. But this started that view of him being the glutton. And with that, at first it was sort of a chicken, but it would have been more like something large you could fit in your hand, the larger the better, to illustrate the point. I mean, this was such an influential movie. At the end of the movie, they kind of recreate the scene where he is, on his last wife and old and sneaking food so that he can eat. So yeah, that's really, really weird how they did that, but it was a huge, huge hit. Definitely one of the most famous scenes. And then, just as proof, I came across, a television show from 1956, What's My Line? It is a really popular game show from the 50s and 60s. The host, John Charles Daly, the premise was that they'd bring somebody in and they'd have panelists try to guess what their job was by asking them questions. Sometimes they'd bring a famous person in, and the panelists would be blindfolded, and they'd have to try to guess who it was by asking them questions. Fun show, definitely very popular at the time, but the very notable host, John Charles Daly, after Laughton was on, he said, okay, I just want to ask you one question. And he asked them about that scene in that movie 23 years earlier. And he said, and I quote, "There is not a more familiar scene for my generation." So, yeah. That was, that's how influential that was. And of course, afterwards, it became parodied, where political cartoons would show, a mayor or a leader or president or whoever, and draw them as Henry VIII, holding a big piece of meat. I mean, that was the idea, the parody. And, American minds, they need to be able to get something immediately. And American minds at that time couldn't identify mutton by sight easily. It wasn't something they saw or dealt with. But turkey? Yeah. So the turkey leg started taking over in that situation. And it started becoming a thing in commercials, decade after decade, and representations of Henry VIII on television, on everything. And and the movie, The Private Life of Henry VIII, it was one of the first syndication deals for TV. So it was one of the first Hollywood movies ever seen on TV in 1948. So throughout the 50s, that movie was seen again and again and again. So it kept reinforcing it. Such a weird thing. Yeah. Right. And Janine's asking if mutton is more popular in Australia. Yes, it is, because of the British influence. You get a lot of because in Europe and England, mutton is a lot more common. So yeah, it is more popular. They still like their beef too. Don't get me wrong. But yeah, it is more popular. Well, I mean, Janine, it's more like the perception of World War II, kind of. I mean, that's kind of it. I mean, people view it based on what they witness, and sometimes images stick in their brain. Yeah, I mean, you got to say, would would History of the World Part 1 be the same if Chaplin hadn't done his comedic version of Hitler? I don't know. I don't think so. I think that image kind of stayed with people. Oh gosh. Yeah, that's a good example, I guess. Yeah, you're right. We need to get going. Yeah. Anyway, I'm almost done, but it was just interesting how that proceeded. And you get examples of it, like here in a Pepto-Bismol commercial from 1982, Henry VIII, turkey leg, to, of course, Homer Simpson being Henry VIII, turkey leg. I mean, there's even a turkey in front of him. Oddly not missing a leg. I don't know how they pulled that one off, but oh well, they have their thing. And and even Saturday Night Live doing, this is from 2016 with Russell Crowe playing holographic Henry VIII. That was the sketch. And I'm not going to lie, don't go looking for it. It was one of the worst Saturday Night Live sketches I've seen in a long time. Oh my God. I even watched the whole episode of that episode of Saturday Night Live from 2016. That was a mistake too. That was a bad episode. But this one was one of the worst. Really, yeah. That was not good. But anyway, they did parody it with a turkey leg. Same thing, because that's what they do. So yeah, it is it's become so synonymous with Henry VIII because of that old movie's association with the gluttonous Henry VIII, and people viewing turkey legs as being that huge piece of meat that is that they can identify, that it became popular at fairs. Crazy, but true. I mean, it's been so trained on us with us because of these images that keep coming up decade after decade after decade. I don't even think you can call it the Mandela effect, where people remember something that didn't exist, like they think they remember a painting of Henry VIII with a turkey leg, and there isn't one. I think it's just been so trained. We've seen it so many times. I don't think it is the Mandela effect. I think it is. It's just an association now. But yeah, it's always crazy. Anyway, let's jump over to to the fair list here. There are a bunch of them. Oh my God, 23 fairs going on this weekend that I found. So yeah, let's do that. Right. Okay, let's see. We got the cap-friendly laser pointer. Excellent. Okay, let's go ahead and start here, and we'll go with King Richard's Fair in Carver, Massachusetts. It is Highland Happenings is the theme, and it's the 6th weekend out of 8. And jumping over to the Connecticut Renaissance Fair, it's 6th out of 7th weekend, so almost done there. And Time Travelers Weekend, this is in Lebanon, Connecticut. Jumping over to the New York Renaissance Fair, this is their last weekend. Yeah, it's in Tuxedo Park, New York. and it is opening 1 hour early for the for this last time. So yeah, something to enjoy. Jumping over to the Pennsylvania Renaissance Fair. This is the 8th weekend out of 11 because they go forever. Long fair. Time Travelers Weekend in Manheim, Pennsylvania. Going down to the Maryland Renaissance Festival. This is the 8th out of 9 weekends, and their theme is ASL interpretation. Interesting. So this is Annapolis, Maryland, of course. Jumping down to the, let's see, where are we? Wait a minute. Here we go. The Fredericksburg Fall Fairy and Dragon Festival. That's a mouthful. The Fredericksburg Fall Fairy and Dragon Festival in Spotsylvania, Virginia, right here. And then the, let's see, Maryland, let's jump down to the Carolina Renaissance Festival, the 2nd out of 8 weekends, and it's kids-free weekend. You get a child admission discount. An adult gets a free child ticket. And that's in Huntersville, North Carolina. And then we go down to Georgia with, I'm going to mispronounce this, Tybee? Tybee, Tybee Island Pirate Fest. And this goes on from Thursday to Sunday. So it's a 4-day event in Tybee Island, Georgia. Then, I just saw Alicia's comment, dang, I heard kids free and thought no kids. Now that would be, yeah, there are some fairs like that, but those are, that's a different kind of fair. Anyway, we have the Tennessee Medieval Fair in Harriman, Tennessee. This is the 1st out of 3 weekends. So all cool there. Jumping up to Ohio, we have the Days of Nights in Lancaster, Ohio. That's free and open to the public, and it's very historically accurate. Then the Ohio Renaissance Festival in Waynesville, Ohio. It's Viking weekend, and it's the 6th out of 8 weekends. Whew. Jumping up to the Grand Valley Renaissance Festival in Allendale, Michigan. Only 1 weekend, so check that out. Going over to Wisconsin, we have the Midwest Viking Festival on Friday and Saturday in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Going down to Illinois, we have the Old English Fair in Stronghold in Oregon, Illinois, just 1 weekend. Then the Iowa Renaissance Festival fall version in Amana Colonies, Iowa, just 1 weekend. Going down to the St. Louis Renaissance Festival in Wentzville, Missouri. That is the 4th out of 6 weekends, and it is Oktoberfest as a theme. Then we go over to the Kansas City Renaissance Festival in Bonner Springs, Kansas. It's the 6th out of 7 weekends, and the theme, and this may be up for the most odd theme of the year. I'll put it on the short list, and we'll see. Barbarian Brewfest. Yes, that's right. Barbarian Brewfest. So all about dogs and beer. Merging that together. Barbarian Brewfest. Oh, and barbarians. So dogs, barbarians, and beer. Yeah, that's an interesting combination. Barbarian. I'll give him credit. Then jumping down, we have the first weekend of the Texas Renaissance Festival. That's the 1st out of 8 weekends in Todd Mission, Texas. And the theme is the Queen's Birthday. They do very traditional themes there. I'll give them a lot of credit on that. Jumping over to Red Lodge, Montana, we have the All Hallows Medieval Fantasy Fair. Just 1 weekend there. Jumping over to Washington, we have the Spokane Renaissance Fair in Colbert, Washington. And then we go down to the Medieval Festival of Courage in Anderson, California, just 1 weekend. And we jump down to the Northern California Renaissance Fair in Hollister, California. That's the 4th out of 6 weekends. And the theme is Oktoberfest. And last but not least, we have the Renaissance of Kings Fair in Hanford, California. So just 1 weekend. Okay. Oh, Alicia, so right. So right. Um, and dogs and drunks and loin clothes. Thank you for that image, Katsurita. Thank you. I, I appreciate that. That was very kind. Okay, well, oh, woo. So, well, thanks for joining me for Fair Life again, and hope you got a little bit of entertainment from hearing about the history of mutton, and and a little bit about the history of turkey legs at Fair. I found it interesting. I hope you did too. And yeah, do get out there if you can. If there are any fairs near you, I mean, there's 23 going on right now, so there's got to be something close, right? So do a little road trip, make a trip, and enjoy that fair because the temperatures are actually starting to go down. Yeah. So get out there and enjoy it while you can. And always, you can't always have a fair day. You can't always have a fair week, but always try to have a fair life. So thank you, and I'll see you next week.